Hi, everyone. This is Gary Berman, host of the Cyberhero Adventures Show. And today we have a very, very special episode where we're going to be taking you, for the first time ever, behind the scenes into our comic creation process. And I'm really, really honored to have our creative director and my partner in this endeavor, Scott Circlin. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, Gary, how's it going?
So glad to see you, and so glad to see you laughing. Why are you laughing already?
I mean, we've been seeing a lot of each other lately because we've been working on this big comic book project, and it's nice that we kind of got it put the finalized it and everything. So it's good we can come on here and kind of talk about it after and now that it's done and everything. So it's quite a bit of a process, but I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. So
yeah, indeed. And, so one of the interesting things that I've listened and learned from about the cybersecurity community is the challenge associated with having, substantive, serious content, even as a name, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, which obviously makes a great, character in the comic world. But how do we balance that between the modality of a comic when there are those who believe that they're not serious enough for a particular industry or things like that?
I mean, yeah, it is kind of, and it's an uphill battle that a lot of cartoonists and people that create comic books are kind of up against because, a lot of people that may not have, I think if most people really think about it, they'll understand that comics just aren't just for kids. I mean, if you look at the number of movies, I mean, the biggest thing in movies right now are like superhero, they're all based on comic books for the most part. And if you've ever been one of those shows, it's not all kids. It's not like you're going to, like a Disney movie or something like that.
That's right.
There's people of all ages. I go to comic conventions all the time. I do signings and things like that. The people that are coming up to my booth very rarely are children. I mean, I would say, more adults are probably interested now in comics than probably even children. So it really is a big, it's a large and even narrowing it down to just superheroes. I mean, that's not even fair because comics can be anything. When people say, well, I don't really like comics for whatever reason, they're usually referring to, I'm not into superheroes, when, comics can cover so many different subjects, just like prose can, so I mean, there's comics based on everything. And some of those comics are educational, and there've been comics that have told really serious topics. If anyone's familiar with Art Spiegelman's Mouse, I mean, it told the story of the Holocaust.
Right.
So if you can do that, you can tell anything, and people do. I mean, just there's comic, basically anything you can think of. There's been a comic book that is illustrated that. So
well, just to build on that point, I mean, one of the interesting things I've come across over these past years is kind of research about how the brain, processes information, and by using a visual medium, such as comics, graphic novels, it actually ignites different parts of the brain and can facilitate absorption of the knowledge.
Yeah, true. And I can definitely speak to that because I grew up as somebody who really struggled in school and academics and everything like that. And what I realized later, after I graduated and went to college, and what I found was it wasn't necessarily that, that I wasn't smart or anything like that. It was just the way I learned differently than the way that the school system was structured. And so when I got on my own, I was able to, build a pretty nice career doing what I want, and as an artist and everything, because I learned how to educate myself in a way that works for me. So how I learn and how a lot of people learn are, like you said, visually, and comics are a great way to do that. So,
and how you and I first came to know one another was through your great series and your books and your YouTube videos, Making Comics 101. So as our audience is looking at the cover of that book, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's in it and what your motivation was and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been doing YouTube content for a while, and again, that's because I think a lot of people, they learn visually, and like I know, and it can be different. For instance, like if I'm watching a YouTube video or something, if it's just a narration, or if it's just, say if it's just text on a screen and then it's got music in the background. Sometimes you'll find YouTube videos like that where
Right.
you
Yeah.
read the text. To me, I need somebody to actually like talk through the process. So, and somebody else might learn a different way, but for me, so that's kind of the content that I do. And I basically, because I am a cartoonist, I do a lot of the stuff. I've learned a lot along the way. And when I was coming up, I didn't have YouTube to teach. There were some books and stuff on the subject, but and back then a lot of illustrators, they were hesitant to share things because it was like, oh, this is a carefully guarded trade secret
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
Nowadays people are more apt to put that information out there, and you can, which is really what one of the amazing things about the internet is, you can learn pretty much anything. People are willing to share that. So I mean, just there's nothing you can't learn just even off of YouTube. So in order to be a part of that, in order to give back some of the things that I've learned, I wanted to share pretty much everything I've learned. So and one of those is comics. So I was looking, there was a lot of content out there on how to create comics, but it was like a video here or a video here by different people, and there was
Right.
nothing structured.
Right.
There were a few people who started to do it, like, oh, I'm gonna show you the step-by-step process of how to make a comic over 20 videos or whatever, and they'd start, and then about video 5 they just quit. So there was
Right.
some of that, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to commit to this, I'm going to put out a multi-video series on how to create comics, everything from coming up with your ideas all the way to printing, publishing, and all the steps in between. And so that I came up with making comics 101, and it's pretty much, I stand by this, and I'll say that it's pretty much the most comprehensive course for free on YouTube that on how to make comics. So
Yeah,
you
and
know,
for our audience, you're going to be able to look at some of Scott's videos and things like that by going to our website, cyberheroescomics.com, and you'll see some of the amazing stuff that I had the privilege of watching. And I've been doing this for some time myself, and I felt like a complete neophyte because in addition to the substance, you're a great teacher and a great communicator. Let's jump into the process of comic
yeah.
creation. And one of the interesting things that I learned early on is I've got a book called Cybersecurity for Dummies. And 10 pages into that book, I was lost. And so I realized there had to be a better way to distill complicated cybersecurity and technology information. So we started anthropomorphizing real life information, real life hacks, and came up with characters, some of which you see behind, like Vernon the Virus, or Phoebe the Fisher, or Sonny the Social Engineer. These characters are all based on reality, but they're given these forms so that people of all ages can just get their heads around what it is that we're attempting to communicate. So we're going to be sharing now with our audience some of the interesting process that we go about to create this. And the very first thing I'd like to ask you about, Scott, is ideation. Where does an idea come from?
Well, I guess it depends on the project. Like if it's something that I'm coming up, if I'm developing this for myself, that's one thing. If I'm developing it for like working with you, you already have predetermined, you have a goal that you're trying to accomplish. So if we're going for that scenario, you come to me and say, okay, we have this client, we want to teach their base or whatever, educate their base on cybersecurity, and then whatever other parameters, say if it's in a healthcare scenario or technology or whatever. And then so we basically take all, these are all the things we need, and I'm sure, and this isn't specific to comics, so anyone I'm sure in your audience, they can get their head around this. It's kind of the same with any project. These are our goals. This is what we need to have. And then from there, I get to figure out so how do we build a story around this? And then, so like, just like we kind of did the same thing with the comic book we just finished, where you already had some of your characters created, like Phoebe the Fisher and the social engineer, and all. We had a number of those characters, but we needed to create additional characters for this particular, storyline based on where it takes place and everything like that. So then I get to think, okay, what can I infuse in these particular characters, different personalities that play off some of these villains. We get to maybe create new villains or heroes. I guess we had to, for this one that we just did, we had to create a whole new group of heroes. And that came from the story we're trying to tell takes place in this, I guess they would refer to it as a cognitive region, or most people would understand it as a smart city, these different regions. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a different character from each one of these regions, just like you're anthropomorphizing, like a virus or whatever, and creating a character out of that. We kind of take these different lands and take the aspects of those lands, which is each particular land about, and we create a hero based on that. So that's how I start. I start with what we need to accomplish and how can we do this creatively, and then from there, a lot of times
let me pause. You're saying so many cool things, so I just want our audience
stop me at any time.
No, it's well, I want to amplify something. So the notion of storytelling and creating heroes. What is the source? What is the process? What are the processes that people go through to come up with motivations for characters? How do you do that?
Yeah, so what I do is I use and this isn't specific to comics, so some of your audience might be familiar with this as well, but are you familiar with the concept of mind mapping?
Yes.
Okay, so mind mapping, it's like a non-linear way of taking notes. So instead of just having your linear list of ideas, you start at a central idea, and then you kind of branch out from there. So that's typically how I start. I'll come up with the character's name, or if I don't have the character's name yet, or maybe I'll put name and put question mark, and then I will have my different offshoots of what could be a possible name for this particular character. It can be anything, and then the more ideas you get, and it's a way of almost brainstorming with yourself. But if you're working with a team, then everyone can contribute to that. You can take everyone's ideas, put it in this mind map, and then now we've got the perfect name for our character. Like we had a character named Sage, who's kind of this kind of tree kind of creature, like if you've seen Marvel's Groot, or like from Lord of the Rings, the tree people in there, but also kind of infused with tech and stuff. But we wanted this character to be this sort of this wise person. So I really like the double meaning of the word sage, where it's sage advice, it's intelligent, it's smart, but also how it relates to nature. So things like that. So, these things fit together. I like this idea, and then you can kind of go from there, and then that's kind of how you just generate ideas, or at least in that brainstorming process. And
terrific.
Find what works perfect.
So you generate the idea. The heroes. They have some type of form. They have some type of name. What about the plot?
So yeah, again, in this particular situation, we had a number of points that we wanted to get across. Some different, like don't share your personal information online. All these different bullet points that we want to get. So we get to figure out how to work those into our situation, our scenario. So I use that sort of a skeleton, and then again, it's a lot of maybe moving puzzle pieces around, like, okay, so how do we, because the main character in our story was a kid, and then there's another thing about sharing, I'm trying to remember
personal information online.
Personal information, that was one thing, but also we needed something that had to do with business, and that didn't really relate to the kids. So we've got her and her family traveling to this destination, and along the way, we can introduce those different things. But we don't want it to just be we want it to be fun and everything. So, you know, we get to figure out if there's some humor we can drop in there. We had a few running gags and everything, just to
Well,
keep that pace going. Yeah.
one of the forgive the interruption. One of the interesting characters, or it's not a gag, but it's a device. Is we created a new character which is a combination dog and drone, and it's called Drog.
Right.
You know, what was the intention there? Like, sort of to break through the fourth wall, so to speak. You know, I mean, what does a narrator character do?
Okay, yeah. So I mean, and Drog, just to give Gary credit, Drog was created before I was kind of brought on, but I think we were able to kind of take that idea and do something interesting with it. We did want to speak directly to the audience, to the reader, and so Drog is somebody who he's not really along with the heroes or the family on this journey that we, you know, but he's there just for the reader. So he'll pop up and he'll just reiterate, because there'll be something going on in the scene where somebody is sharing their personal information, and Drog is there to pop up and say, you know, oh, don't do this. That way you can, it's just kind of fun. It's familiar to kind of see him pop up time and time again throughout the story, and just kind of, you know, add a little punch to what's going on in the story. Also, it's a good way to, it's a good way to like introduce the story, you know, because he's basically kind of like the narrator, you know, and we did some certain things to make sure that people know that he's not actually there with the rest of the characters in the story, like the way and we'll get into lettering and stuff later, but his word balloons are slightly different colors, and the way the panels that he's in are slightly different. So you know that he's there just for us as the reader, to get those points across.
Exactly. And so now, you know, we have the basic idea of the characters. We have a pretty good guidance about their motivations. And so it all now, you know, comes together in the form of a script. Tell us about that, because I think it requires such a level of specificity. It's sort of like doing a movie, like over the shoulder shot. You know, maybe you can tell our audience about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are more familiar with that, even if you haven't read comics. That you may probably have heard of the idea of like, you know, bird's eye view or whatever. And we kind of use in comics, we use a lot of those same terminologies, but we're not necessarily working in. I mean, I guess we still work in scenes, but they're also, I mean, comics are unlike other mediums, and there's certain things you can do in comics that you can't do in any other medium. For one thing, in comics, you can set the pacing of the story by, say, the number of panels you use. Where if you're watching a movie, the movie's going to go along at the pace it's going.
Right.
With comics, people might slow down, and if you do some interesting things with panels, like if you want to really get the point across that what's going on right now is really a slog or boring, you'll have a whole bunch more panels where very little happens from each thing to the next. Or if you want it more exciting, then it's faster paced, and you can do all that with panels. So there's some of that when you're writing the script. So you're thinking about, you know, what's happening on each page. You got to take into consideration the page turn. For instance, if you want a big reveal, you don't want to show it on the opposite page. You want to make sure that when they flip that over and it's a brand new page, that's oh wow, because you don't want them to see it before they kind of flip it. So that's another thing you have to think about, is the pacing. You've got, you know, usually when you open a comic, you've got one facing page, and when you open it, you have a spread, and then it's spreads till the very last page. So you get to figure out, understand what's going to happen and when that page turn is going to happen. So if you have a big reveal, you don't already see it until you turn that page, like, oh wow. So things like
that's cool.
Yeah, stuff like that are things you want to take into consideration when writing your script for your comic.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than I thought when I first started getting into it, and as we're getting even more granular, it's incredible, the process. Okay, so let's say we have a fully developed script. What's next?
So from there, what we'll do is so this whole process can be, typically it's like an assembly line process where different people have different roles to play. Although somebody can create a comic themselves from start to finish, they can write it draw it. I mean, I've got my own personal comic that I do all that, but then I do other projects where, like in this one, even though I am an artist, we had another artist working on this, and I did the writing chore on this one. But so basically, we've got the script, and the script pretty much, explains what's happening. Then that script is usually given over to a penciler. And the penciler is basically the illustrator. Sometimes the penciler can also be the inker. And what the inker does, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but just to explain what's going on, the inker makes it basically so it's print ready, because pencils don't always reproduce as crisp, so they've got to go over with ink. The penciler could also be the inker. In this case, that was the case. And any pencil might not even mean pencil, because a lot of times now we do stuff digitally. But so the pencil, usually what they'll do is they will do what we call thumbnails, or some people might refer to them as storyboards. So it's basically a real rough interpretation of what's going to happen in the story, and I'm sure we've got some visuals to kind of show you.
Yep.
And so we've got a rough idea, and this can be it's really up to the artist how rough it is, as long as they can communicate what's going on. It could be stick figures. Our illustrator in this project, her roughs are pretty for roughs anyway. They're pretty tight. So, but anyway, basically lay out everything so you can see visually, so everyone can see visually the writer, and then that way you're not spending a whole lot of time drawing a page and like, oh, that's not really what I wanted, and then they have to redraw it. So you get the idea of what the illustrator is imagining with these rough drawings. Then once all those rough drawings are approved, then they start to do the more detailed pages, the pencils, and then if the pencils are done, they could be handed off to an inker, or the penciler can do the inking themselves.
And so our audience is looking at some samples of that now as we're speaking. And so after we have the penciler, the inker, or the digital representation of the story, the next step is to add color. And that's pretty complicated, isn't it? What color palette, for example?
Yeah. so and not all comics have to be color. I mean, I do a comic that's a black and white comic, but in this case, we do. I think there are people like me who really love black and white, just the line art stuff. But for the general population, they want to see stuff in color, unless you're talking about like Japanese manga or something, which a lot of times is black and white.
Right. Yeah.
But so anyway, but in this book we are doing color, so we have to have a color. So and it's really a lot of colors have sort of a painting background. They have a really good understanding of color theory. So they know how shadows fall, how that affects things. They know, how to create a mood based on, like, if you're in like a warm environment, you're using reds versus a cool environment, you're using cool colors like blues and things. And that also gets the emotion across. If you want to kind of give sort of a sense of anger or something, or then you might go with more of a warmer color palette versus a cooler. There's all kinds of things that if you learn color theory, you can kind of integrate into the story.
And also many brands have approved colors, and understandably they're very they want to make sure that the color palette fits within their structure and how their brand is represented in graphic forms, right?
Yeah, and it's really no different than let's see. I mean, red is used a lot in branding and everything, but there's some companies that's not really the look they want to get across. If they, you could either use something different to differentiate yourself, or maybe we want something. I mean, any business you can look at, there's really particular reasons why they picked out their color scheme. So
yeah, indeed, and it's important to be aligned, and consistent with that. So now we have the colors, and so here's one of the final steps, which is merging the script, in other words, the dialogue, with everything that's been done in the form of what I refer to as thought bubbles. Maybe you can share with our audience the nature of thought bubbles, and then also how do you imbue a comic with sound?
Yeah. So So for that task is done by the letterer. So they're usually a specific person that does the lettering, and they can be referred to as different things. They can be referred to as speech bubbles. I typically refer to them as word balloons or thought balloons, depending, if it's something somebody's speaking, that would be a word balloon, versus something somebody's thinking, that would be a thought balloon or whatever. And there's different ways to represent that. A thought balloon would be more, it kind of looks like a puffy cloud. It could, but nowadays a lot of comic artists are moving away from that, and more of they like have an inner thought, which might be in a box, which would be like a caption box, or in our case, like we have a narration. It might be more of a kind of a square thing, like, oh, this is the city, blah blah blah, to introduce things. If it's something that's not being spoken by a character but a narrator, that might be in a caption box. And there's all kinds of different word balloons you can use. If it's a robot speaking, you might have like a kind of like a lightning bolt balloon tail. So the balloon is basically its structure. It is kind of what it is. There's a balloon, which is the bubble part. And then there's the balloon tail, which is what comes down and kind of points to the character, whoever's speaking, so you know who's speaking. And there's a lot of rules, like it's kind of like Ghostbusters, where you don't cross the streams, like you don't want to have a balloon here, and then opposite to the person talking where the balloons cross. And there's all kinds of rules and stuff like that I don't want to bore you with. But there, there's just tons. And I've designed like tutorials and things like that on. I've got something called the Comic Lettering Masterclass, which talks all about that kind of stuff. But also with lettering, not only the words people are speaking are sound effects, or technically in comics, there's no sound because there's no sound in comics. So I guess the proper term would be onomatopoeia, but that's kind of a mouthful. It's a fun word to say, but it's kind of a mouthful. But whether you call it onomatopoeia or sound effects or whatever, those are the word. That's basically like a sound that something is making, like a crash, or any, like what you would see in a movie would be a sound effects. And that's where you really get to have fun, because there's all kinds of interesting ways you can illustrate sound in comics, where like if you've got a big explosion that kind of trails off, you want to start off with big letters, and then maybe the letters get a little smaller. And if you want to show like a reverberation, then you can kind of make that kind of jagged. But sound effects are one of my favorite things to do, because it's, when you're thinking about it, it's almost like, okay, what is the sound that say so we've got in our, I don't remember the sound effect that the letter used on ours, but we had one of our characters shoot a harpoon, and it shoots through, and then it hits like a panel or something on a yacht. So what does that sound like? Like, what is the sound of a harpoon going through the air? So when I'm doing sound effects, I'll say it out loud. I'm like, or like, and I'll roll around in my head, and then I'm like, how do you spell that? How do you spell a thoom or a whoosh? Whoosh? I mean, how do you spell that? So that's kind of, and there's no right or wrong way. So you just kind of figure that out, and then again, you kind of take into the way that it's traveling. It can kind of wave around or whatever, depending on what, and then what happens when it hits another object, then it's like a thump or a thump, depending on if it's metal, it would be like a ting, or if it's something soft, it'd be like a,
Exactly.
So anyway, so that's the job of the letterist.
Well, you're also touching on something as we're wrapping up here, that's incredibly central to our DNA, which is that this is fun. That the comic creation process is fun. It's the opposite of kind of death by PowerPoint. In
Exactly.
Well, we created a character called the presenter, and her special superpower was that she could put people to sleep with PowerPoint slides. And everyone in our industry and beyond knows the truth of that. That character and that statement. So it's a lot of fun. Scott, words cannot adequately express my gratitude, but a comic could. So thank you so much for who you are and what you do and why you do it, and for all the great work that we've been able to accomplish, and much more going forward. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Gary. And it's been a pleasure working on this project with you, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do many more. So
And to our audience, stay tuned. Thanks so much for who you are and what you do and why you do it. This is Gary Berman signing off for today.